They only hunt after night falls. Always lone motorists stop between mile markers 189 and 206. It's no secret that something is off about that stretch of I-35, and the disappearances that occurred there have not gone unnoticed. And now, thanks to me, that body count has gone up by one more. Many have described the feeling of wrongness that pervades the area, how it seeps from the road, the trees. I can't help but imagine how those unlucky enough to meet their end there must feel. Breathing in the weighty desperation and shaking, panic gasps made heavier with the knowledge that they'll be their last. We do try and take precautions, but we can only do so much. It's the only stretch of highway in the state with no standing signs, threatening fines that are astronomically high for violating what may seem like a ridiculous request. The particularly eagle-eyed may also notice how the fence of the tree line is much taller than that of the other areas. Even then, some still manage to scale it. It's not surprising that many local urban legends focus on this place. What has never ceased to surprise me, though, is how the truth can be more terrifying than our wildest nightmares. As far as I know, only one person has ever seen what dwells on the other side of that fence up close and lived to tell the tale, but he refuses to speak of the encounter or much of anything else after what he witnessed. It is a presence that is only detectable by the absence of those unfortunate enough to meet their end between miles 189 and 206. Before last week, I hadn't lost anyone on my shift, something I like to think my wife, Marta, would be proud of if she were still here. Marta is why I took this particular job. I've been an officer for decades, but it was only after I lost her that I was told what really happens after dark on that lonely stretch of highway. That was when I requested to be reassigned there. Now, I only work from dusk till dawn on a much smaller stretch of the road to make sure absolutely no one else has to go through what she did. I am not here to issue tickets. I aim to minimize deaths. For a long time, I blamed myself for losing Marta, for not getting her call before it was too late. Her call, that she was stalled out near mile marker 203. I was performing a traffic stop in my assigned district about 30 miles away at the time, unable to answer my phone, and only hearing her message after I jumped back in the cruiser. I beat the tow truck there, but it was already too late. Every night that I'm unable to sleep, when I still instinctively find myself reaching for that empty side of the bed, I can't help but to fixate on how everything would have been different if I'd been with her. How maybe if I'd answered the phone, that space wouldn't be empty. How if I hadn't been at work, I wouldn't have to replay the last message she'd ever leave me in order to hear her voice. Zach, I'm going to be late. The message starts out, Marta's voice shaky. I'm fine. I could picture her hands up placatingly as she tried calming down both of us. Some asshole clipped me and I spun out into the ditch. I'm fine. The car is fine. I'm just kind of scratched up. The guy just drove off, but yes, I got the plate. It's a vanity and is very fitting. She reads the plate out, and she was right, it was fitting. I'm frankly shocked the DVS approved it. AAA is coming, so everything is fine. I love you. I'll see you when you get home from work. A pause, her voice suddenly a whisper. Do you hear them? The beeping of a car door opening. A staticky thud, as the phone falls from her hand to where we'd later find it left behind in the driver's seat. I always hang up then, because I can't bear to hear the distant sounds that follow. It's cruel to berate myself, knowing what I do now, that she was doomed the moment she went off the road and her car stalled. The moment that all other traffic passed her and she was alone in the darkness, it was all over. It wouldn't have mattered if I were 30 miles away or 5. I don't blame the other officer assigned to patrol that area either. This special unit was short-staffed at the time, and he was helping someone else several miles down the road. I'd sped down to where her car was, beating the tow truck, but only seeing an empty vehicle. Flashers on, door ajar, the usually silent night air was filled with something I could only describe as the buzzing of a million frantic insects. Until I stepped out of my car. Then the sound faded, replaced by something else. Zach! I sighed in relief at the sound of my wife's voice in the distance, despite the strange gurgle it was heavy with. Despite it coming from over a 6-foot chain-link fence and the trees beyond. I ran to her before the flashing lights of the patrol car of the other officer appeared and her voice faded, swallowed up by the droning that faded to silence. I hadn't even realized I'd been scaling the fence. It was like snapping awake from stupor. The officer stopped me, told me Marta was already back at the station. I wondered if maybe in my panic, I'd imagined her voice. When we got there, though, they kept me caught up in bureaucratic red tape until it was nearly dawn. Only when it was safe to pull what was left of her from the woods the next morning would I see her again. Only then would they tell me the truth. Most nights on the new job were uneventful. It's funny how after enough time, anything can become a new normal. My co-worker, Brennan, the same officer who had to break the news to me about Marta, and I patrol our assigned areas, keeping an eye and ear out for anyone in need of our help. The night of my first call had begun like the much more mundane. Brennan had called and was in the midst of describing the plot of some 80s B-flick he'd watched the night before when the radio hissed out a code H-197. Someone had called for a tow at mile marker 197. The company's dispatcher knew just enough to immediately refer them to us. I was closest, so I turned on the lights and siren and I headed over, speeding through the dark pines that had cast the highway into a tunnel of darkness. The sound and light serve to buy our stranded motorists some time, a distraction that'll reach them before I do. But what really deters whatever lurks beyond the fence seems to be the presence of another mind, another target. Perhaps by diluting the focus of the predators, perhaps by distracting us, their potential prey. At first, I thought I was too late. The car was empty, and it was only after my eyes had adjusted that I saw the driver, already on the other side of the fence, seeming to reach into the darkness. I called out to him, and he turned me dazed. In the brief moments before the presence in the dark fell silent, I caught a whisper of a familiar voice seeping through, floating along with the darkness itself. I shone my flashlight in his direction, and his pupils, which were so dilated they'd swallowed his irises, shrunk again as he blinked away his confusion. As he did so, I could see my light reflected in countless pairs of eyes, bright pinpricks floating in the darkness behind him the moment before they retreated back. The driver stood in shock for a long moment, before frantically trying and failing to scale the fence to reach me. After I helped him over, he clutched his trembling arm to his chest, spongy-looking exposed bone at the wrist, everything below it already gone. I radioed for an ambulance while the man just stared into space. I nodded patiently as he seemed to struggle to find the right words to describe what happened. His eyes wide and unblinking, glassy. He shivered violently in the summer night, before finally letting loose the torrent of words. He spoke of the whispered invitation from the woods, spoken in the familiar voice of a loved one long departed. It had happened so fast. He'd stepped out of the car after popping the hood, and the next thing he knew, he was on the other side of the fence. All he could tell me was that, for reasons that no longer made sense to him, he had to reach the source of the sound beyond the trees. He spoke of the awful things he'd seen in the brief flicker of my flashlight beam. Things that belong in the shadowy pools of our deepest nightmares, not the woods off I-35. I nodded until he fell silent. From what I've heard, he still refuses to speak about the experience. His brief glimpse at the presence in the woods had apparently been enough to fray the threads of his mind beyond repair. I waited with him until the ambulance arrived. Our people in the know and used to this sort of call. And then, as their lights and sirens faded into the distance, I hopped into my cruiser and took one last glance into the trees. I couldn't help but think about Marta out there. What had called out to her while she was all alone in the dark? How I arrived far too late to help her. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I search for plates, the vanities of the car that knocked her off the road. The one she described in what was to be the last phone call she ever made. But unlike their unknown owner, the plates have no hits. After helping the motorist that nearly met a grisly end, it was thankfully quiet for a while. My nights consisted only of driving up and down my stretch of highway while Brennan and I bullshitted. But then last week happened, the night that has me reconsidering my entire career. I keep replaying the scene in my head. The car speeds by me. It's got to be pulling over 120, drifting in and out of lanes so erratically that I have to messily swerve out of their way and onto the shoulder as they pass. Even then, they still just barely miss me. The jarring sound of screaming metal and shattering glass shrieks through the distance. I pull back onto the road and speed after him. He didn't make it far. Skid marks show the messy journey from road to tree. He has the misfortune of crashing into mile marker 192. The only luck on his side is that I was so close by, Miraculously, he's banged up, but for the most part, okay. The car, on the other hand, won't be going anywhere anytime soon. He doesn't seem to see me approach or hear me ask if he's all right, so I rap on the window loudly and shout that I'm radioing for an ambulance. That seems to snap him out of his stupor. He finally rolls the window down, and it smells like he's been bathing in Everclear. He refuses. He doesn't want to go in for driving drunk. I quickly ask for license and registration, even though this isn't a traffic stop as so much as a rescue mission. I've already decided that it's quickest if I take him in for reckless driving. I can breathalyze him back at the station when he's out of danger. How I could probably wait hours to test him, and he'd still be several times over the legal limit. He instead staggers out of the car and yells at me, waving his finger at a space several feet to my right, the place he seems to think I'm standing. "You need to come with me, sir." I whisper, "It's not safe." I stop cold when I finally notice his license plate and find myself tuning out his barrage of insults. Marta's last voicemail to me replays in my head. The vanity plates of the car that knocked her off the road without bothering to stop and help. No wonder I never found them before. I tried various abbreviations, but his are from a state over, one letter longer, and a creative take on the phrase that I wouldn't have guessed. I really study him this time as he rages in the blue and red light for my cruiser. He doesn't look evil like I'd pictured or killer. He's just some drunk asshole who doesn't give two shits about anyone or anything other than avoiding going in for another DUI. Somehow that's even worse. I finally snap back to reality in time to hear him slur that I can fuck right off. Maybe I'm a bad person for the choice that I made. I decided that I'd give him exactly what he asked for. "You have yourself a good night, sir." I reply. I leave him standing there, and I do fuck right off, turning off my lights as soon as I start my car. I can feel the eyes from the woods on us, and in my rear view, I see him begin his weaving, unsteady walk toward the fence. I don't stick around to watch. The next day, the car's still there, its driver gone, both literally and figuratively. I'm still struggling with my decision. I try to turn in my resignation, but my boss would not accept it, telling me something along the lines of, "You failed to stop a belligerent repeat drunk driver from wandering off into the woods. You did what you could." I tried to correct him. I told him what I really did, how I took a life, how it was not negligence, it was murder, how that makes me just as bad as the man I condemned to death. He shrugged it off, reminded me that I've saved far more lives than the one I've taken. So I decided to stay on the job, but I have another confession. After I helped a motorist change a flat tire yesterday, in the moments before I started my car, the voices from beyond the trees were louder than ever before. Yes, voices, plural. For the first time, Marta's soft beseechment changed from a solo to a duet. A new voice has joined the pleading call from the woods. A voice that I can still recognize, even though it's much clearer now that it no longer slurs the words.